Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. And in today's video, I'd actually like to unpack something that I brushed over in my most recent video, the hour and a half that I spent defending the epilogue to the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. Similarly, this video will contain spoilers for the entire Hunger Games trilogy, and similarly, we are going to be focusing on just a few pages. Once again, this is a Hunger Games media analysis video. It's me talking about something with the assumption that you've either read it for yourself or at least seen the movies a few years ago. I will be reading the passage in question from the book, but I would likely not consider this to be a good starter Hunger Games discourse video if you're not really familiar with the concept of the series. Today, I want to talk about the baby bluff in Catching Fire, when Peeta Mellark, world's best boy and the love of my life, pulls off one of my favorites of his many stunts. This is a scene I could and will talk about for hours, so we'll talk about it again in my forthcoming Peeta video, but I wanted to break this out because I want to talk about other characters too, and not just Katniss and Peeta. I pretty much hate the Hunger Games movies. My usual exception to that is that I do think Catching Fire is a genuinely fun movie to watch. It also sort of made sense in the context of the films for the second movie to get so much bigger and grander in scale, right? Like they shot that one in IMAX. There's a really fun ratio change as Katniss pulls up into the arena for the second time. They really made the most of the we're back and it's more dangerous than ever sort of theme that the book allowed for. And it also makes sense for Catching Fire to have been the best movie because I think Catching Fire is pretty easily the best book in the original trilogy. So Francis Lawrence would have had to do a way worse job than he did to really mess that up. He did okay, mostly, other than, okay, I do have some characterization gripes. I have a lot of characterization gripes in Catching Fire and honestly all the movies, but I think a really fun scene to study this in would be the pre-arena interview scene and everything that I feel like gets lost in adaptation in the Catching Fire movie. So that's what I'd like to do. But first, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Aura. Did you know that on average it takes a company 277 days to report a data breach? Your data could have been breached months ago and you could only just be hearing about it right now. Bank of America just recently announced a breach. JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup both also announced breaches last year. And all of these banks find out about your data being compromised and then they just kind of sit on it, which gives the bad actors a huge head start before you even realize there's a problem you need to fix. I am a big fan of Aura for how many problems they fix for me, which is why I'm happy to be talking about them today. Aura keeps a much closer eye on me than my bank does. They alert me if they find my phone number, my email, my social security number on the dark web, and they're going to let me know fast if anybody tries using any of those things to access my credit or my bank accounts. They also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance and a bunch of other features to help keep you safe online, all inside one app. You can go to my link, aura.com/ovidoki, to try 14 days for free, and that will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. That way you can learn about it before one of these companies is forced to notify you and offer you free credit monitoring after the fact, which is kind of like offering you security cameras after they watched your house get robbed. Look, I get it, it's overwhelming and there are a ton of data breaches all the time, but if you haven't already been a victim of fraud, it's probably time to stop rolling those dice. And if the reason you're still rolling those dice is because protecting yourself feels overwhelming, you can do what I do and let Aura do the hard work for you. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable to these data breaches, and I don't want anyone in the nuance corner to be either, so you can go to aura.com/ofidoki to try 2 weeks for free, or you can click on the link on the screen right now. Thank you so much again to Aura for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the Hunger Games. I'd like to start by setting the scene in the book before I complain about the movie too much. It is the evening before the 75th Hunger Games, the third quarter quell in which former victors of the Hunger Games will all be forced to compete again against each other. Katniss and Peeta have both already engaged in their little private acts of rebellion in their private sessions with the game makers. The stuff I talked about in my other video, when Peeta painted Rue on the floor and Katniss painted and hung a dummy of Seneca Crane, but they still have not been let in on any of the wider mechanisms going on around them in terms of the brewing revolution. Katniss is told that President Snow insisted, despite Cinna's objections, that she wear the wedding dress the Capitol had voted on, which was sewn for her before the announcement of the Quarter Quell's theme. And I'm going to read most of this scene, but it takes place over 2 chapters, and it's kind of long, so I will be interrupting myself. But let me start. The other tributes have already gathered off stage and are talking softly, but when Peeta and I arrive, they fall silent. I realize everyone's staring daggers at my wedding dress. Are they jealous of its beauty? The power it might have to manipulate the crowd? Finally, Finnick says, I can't believe Cinna put you in that thing. He didn't have any choice. President Snow made him, I say, somewhat defensively. I won't let anyone criticize Cinna. Cashmere tosses her flowing blonde curls back and spits out, Well, you look ridiculous. She grabs her brother's hand and pulls him into place to lead our procession onto the stage. The other tributes begin to line up as well. I'm confused because while they all are angry, some are giving us sympathetic pats on the shoulder, and Johanna Mason actually stops to straighten my pearl necklace. Make him pay for it, okay? She says. I nod, but I don't know what she means. Not until we're all sitting out on stage and Caesar Flickerman, hair and face highlighted in lavender this year, has done his opening spiel and the tributes begin their interviews. This is the first time I realize the depth of betrayal felt among the victors and the rage that accompanies it. But they are so smart, so wonderfully smart about how they play it, because it all comes back to reflect on the government, and President Snow in particular. Not everyone. There are the old throwbacks, like Brutus and Anabaria, who are just here for another games, and those too baffled or drugged or lost to join in on the attack. But there are enough victors who still have the wits and the nerve to come out fighting. Kashmir starts the ball rolling with a speech about how she just can't stop crying when she thinks about how much the people in the capital must be suffering because they will lose us. Gloss recalls the kindness shown here to him and his sister. Beatty questions the legality of the quell in his nervous, twitchy way, wondering if it's been fully examined by experts of late. Finnick recites a poem he wrote to his one true love in the capital, and about 100 people faint because they're sure he means them. By the time Johanna Mason gets up, she's asking if something can't be done about the situation. Surely the creators of the Quarter Quell never anticipated such love forming between the victors and the capital. No one could be so cruel as to sever such a deep bond. Cedar quietly ruminates about how, back in District 11, everyone assumes President Snow is all-powerful. So if he's all-powerful, why doesn't he change the Quell? And Chaff, who comes right on her heels, insists the president could change the Quell if he wanted to, but he must not think it matters much to anyone. By the time I'm introduced, the audience is an absolute wreck. People have been weeping and collapsing, and even calling for change. The sight of me in my white silk bridal gown practically causes a riot. No more me. No more star-crossed lovers living happily ever after. No more wedding. I can see even Caesar's professionalism showing some cracks as he tries to quiet them so I can speak, but my 3 minutes are ticking quickly away. All right. There are things we're going to be breaking down further once we get to the baby bluff and what Katniss says about it. We are going to get to it. But I think that there are a lot of things you could say to describe the interview scene in the movie, specifically the piece of it where Jenna Malone yells, like, fuck that, fuck anyone who had anything to do with it. But wow, holy shit, that is not how the character played the interview, and it doesn't seem to be how any of the characters in the Quarter Quell played that interview, actually. When I posted about this on Blue Sky the other week, someone was all, movies don't have to be perfect word for word adaptations of their source material. And yeah, that is mostly true. There are plenty of little things that didn't make it into the movies that, while I find them impactful in the books, I'm not entirely broken up about their absence. Do I think they could have worked a little bit harder to get Katniss that gold Mockingjay pin? Yes. Am I, actively upset that they didn't include Madge in the movies? Not really. But the reason why this tribute interview scene bothers me in the movie is that while, yes, we do get to see at least a little bit of these interviews, we see a fully different version of Katniss Everdeen watching these interviews. As always. Katniss watches a fairly accurate version of Cashmere and Gloss's interview while Cinna puts the final touches on her outfit, and her response is this scoffing, does anyone actually believe this? And then we get Haymitch explaining it out loud to her after he points out that apparently everybody does, in fact, believe it. Haymitch says it outright. These victors are angry, Katniss. They'll say anything to try to stop the games. But then he says, I suggest you do the same, which is not where Haymitch is in the books at this point. But okay, I understand. We need to make some of this explicit, I guess. And also, I said that the Gloss and Cashmere interview is mostly accurate, but it doesn't actually make sense for more than 2 seconds how they go on together and then Katniss and Peeta are separate, when Katniss and Peeta are a couple and would be presented just as much as a couple as a pair of siblings would. But anyway, Jeffrey Wright as Beetee responds to a question that didn't exactly set him up to say as much with, if the quarter quell were written into law by men, certainly it can be unwritten. And I'm fine with that. It's fine. We get Sam Claflin as Finnick, promising that if he dies in the arena, his last thought will be of his lover's lips. Would need an entire movie just to point out why I think Sam Claflin was so wrong for Finnick, but it's not entirely Sam's fault. Then we get to Johanna, and as noted, Johanna Mason, the Jenna Malone version in the movie, is a completely different character, making a completely different strategy the night before the Hunger Games. And I'm not arguing that it isn't a fun scene in the movie. Fun is pretty much exactly the word I would use to describe it. It's fun. It's fun to watch Jenna Malone shout. It's fun, and it feels good to hear her talk about how she's getting screwed over, but that's not what Johanna Mason's strategy was ahead of the games. Not only does it not fit with so smartly rolling the blame back to the president in particular, because anyone who had anything to do with it is really broad and kind of implicates the audience themselves in the guilt in a way that everyone else seems to be working during their flattery-laced revolution bait to avoid, right? They're not trying to blame the Capitol. They're trying to ask the Capitol for help. And Joanna's strategy in the books to cry in her interview is much more clever and much more complicated, but the movies really struggle with a character who can say one thing while meaning another, and I guess they didn't trust that, like, one single shot of Johanna not looking torn up after she manipulated the audience would sell that she was manipulating the audience. As fun as I think it is for Johanna Mason to snap and seethe and yell and be bleeped out, I think it's actually kind of grossly out of character for her because she was in fact so much smarter than that, so much more intentional and manipulative. We've actually known about Johanna Mason all the way back from the first book when Katniss name drops her. Katniss talks about her for the first time while she's still distrustful of Peeta, and that's why I care that they mischaracterized her interview, and why I'm willing to call it an outright mischaracterization and not me doing cinema sins about how actually Finnick's message was supposed to be a poem. From the first book, Peeta Mellark, on the other hand, has obviously been crying, and interestingly enough, does not seem to be trying to cover it up. I immediately wonder if this will be his strategy in the games, to appear weak and frightened, to reassure the other tributes that he is no competition at all, and then come out fighting. This worked very well for a girl, Johanna Mason, from District 7 a few years back. She seemed like such a sniveling, cowardly fool that no one bothered about her until there were only a handful of contestants left. It turned out she could kill viciously. Pretty clever, the way she played it, but this seems an odd strategy for Peeta Mellark, because he's a baker's son. All those years of having enough to eat and hauling bread trays around have made him broad-shouldered and strong. It will take an awful lot of weeping to convince anyone to overlook him. And just like Peeta can't be nearly complicated enough to be portrayed well in the movies, neither can Johanna Mason. Like, as fun as the yelling is to watch, it's actually infinitely more interesting to me that this woman would have tried to pull the same strategy off twice, playing off her emotions ahead of the games and then being savage inside of them. And yeah, as much as I get that in theory here I shouldn't be tone policing her for being mad about being dragged back into the arena again, it would be silly of me not to bring up that, oh no, you guys love me so much, can't you please save me, is a little bit more of an effective call to action than fuck that and fuck anybody that had anything to do with it. And we also don't even get anyone between Johanna and Katniss. So District 11, once again, being the ones who set District 12 up to completely overhaul and change the system and have this entire revolution happen, completely gone. I'm sorry, Cedar and Chaff, you don't matter, we're putting in some Effie shit instead. They saved at least the make him pay for it line. That is preserved. And I'm not even angry about giving Johanna the really a wedding dress line before it. Like, I don't care. I do understand that you have to have some kind of economy of storytelling here, right? But I am genuinely bothered by the complete omission of Chaff and Cedar from District 11 and how they played their interviews. What a direct call to action they gave and how important that ends up being. And then also, by extension, the audience already was out of Caesar's control by the time Katniss arrived because of that. That's why that was important. It is gone in the movie. In the movie, Caesar is very much still just holding it down. He's fine. The audience cheers for Katniss, and she's pretty in her wedding dress, but there's not the same sense of tension, and there's no reason to be able to attribute that tension to the joint effort of all of the other victors who came before her and Peeta. So Katniss goes on in her wedding dress, and in the book, it goes like this. Finally, there's a lull, and he gets out. So, Katniss, obviously this is a very emotional night for everyone. Is there anything you'd like to say? My voice trembles as I speak. Only that I'm so sorry you won't get to be at my wedding. But I'm glad you at least get to see me in my dress. Isn't it just the most beautiful thing? I don't have to look at Cinna for a signal. I know this is the right time. I begin to twirl slowly, raising the sleeves of my heavy gown above my head. When I hear the screams of the crowd, I think it's because I must look stunning. Then I notice something is rising up around me. Smoke. From fire. Not the flickery stuff I wore last year in the chariot, but something much more real that devours my dress. I begin to panic as the smoke thickens. Charred bits of black silk swirl into the air, and pearls clatter to the stage. Somehow I'm afraid to stop because my flesh doesn't seem to be burning, and I know Cinna must be behind whatever is happening. So I keep spinning and spinning. For a split second, I'm gasping, completely engulfed in the strange flames. Then, all at once, the fire is gone. I slowly come to a stop, wondering if I'm naked and why Cinna has arranged to burn away my wedding dress. But I'm not naked. I'm in a dress of the exact design of my wedding dress, only it's the color of coal and made of tiny feathers. Wonderingly, I lift my long, flowing sleeves into the air, and that's when I see myself on the television screen, clothed in black except for the white patches on my sleeves. Or should I say my wings? Because Cinna has turned me into a mockingjay. I'm still smoldering a little, so it's with a tentative hand that Caesar reaches out to touch my headpiece. The white has burned away, leaving a smooth fitted veil of black that drapes into the neckline of the dress in the back. Feathers, says Caesar. You're like a bird. A mockingjay, I think, I say, giving my wings a small flap. It's the bird on the pin I wear as a token. A shadow of recognition flickers across Caesar's face, and I can tell he knows that the Mockingjay isn't just my token, that it's come to symbolize so much more, that what will be seen as a flashy costume change in the capital is resonating in an entirely different way throughout the districts, but he makes the best of it. Well, hats off to your stylist. I don't think anyone can argue that that's not the most spectacular thing we've ever seen in an interview. Cinna, I think you'd better take a bow. Caesar gestures for Cinna to rise. He does, and makes a small, gracious bow, and suddenly I am so afraid for him. What has he done? Something terribly dangerous. An act of rebellion in itself, and he's done it for me. I remember his words. Don't worry, I always channel my emotions into my work. That way I don't hurt anyone but myself. And I'm afraid he has hurt himself beyond repair. The significance of my fiery transformation will not be lost on President Snow. The audience, who's been stunned into silence, breaks into wild applause. I can barely hear the buzzer that indicates that my 3 minutes are up. Caesar thanks me, and I go back to my seat, my dress now feeling lighter than air. As I pass Peeta, who's headed for his interview, he doesn't meet my eyes. I take my seat carefully, but aside from the puffs of smoke here and there, I seem unharmed, so I turn my attention to him. And then, in the movie, it's just not right. It's wrong. They do it wrong. First of all, they give her the rapport that Caesar and Peeta are supposed to have. So rather than giving a soft emotional call for the audience to pity her by saying she's sorry they can't be at her wedding, she tells Caesar not to go crying on her, and he calls her cheeky. He calls her cheeky, and he prompts her about how the audience is so disappointed that the wedding isn't going to take place, and then he's the one who tells her to spin after she says the president wanted everyone to see her wedding dress. In the movie, the dress does go up in flames, and the process isn't nearly as violent or scary as in the book, many such cases. The audience mostly, though, just cheers like it's a big flashy costume change. It's not really as volatile as a reaction as I feel like is promised from the book. We do cut to snow after we see Katniss in the Mockingjay dress, and I guess that would help to get across to someone who didn't read the books that it's a big deal that she's in that costume and that it probably has something to do with the rebellion. But I feel like these movies had to dumb so many things down so much to try to make sense, and then the things that they couldn't dumb down, I don't understand how they would have even made sense to the average viewer, even with all the other shit that got dumbed down. Please let me know. Were you, if you didn't read the books but you're watching this and you also watched the movies, like, were you lost? Were you lost if you watched the movies before the book? Am I overthinking this? Did it make sense? Did you understand why she turned into a Mockingjay? I cannot fathom being able to understand why she turned into a Mockingjay just from the movies. And Okay, here's the actual worst part, though. A part that is so worst that I will have even more to say about it when I talk about Peeta and all of his stunts in his own video. But the worst part to me, the way that the movie handled the baby bluff, it's just unforgivable to me. It's really bad. Starting again with how it is presented in the book. Caesar and Peeta have been a natural team since they first appeared together a year ago. Their easy give and take, comic timing, and ability to segue into heart-wrenching moments, like Peeta's confession of love for me, have made them a huge success with the audience. They effortlessly open with a few jokes about fires and feathers and overcooking poultry, but anyone can see that Peeta is preoccupied, so Caesar directs the conversation right into the subject that's on everyone's minds. So, Peeta, what was it like when, after all you've been through, you found out about the quell? Asked Caesar. I was in shock. I mean, one minute I'm seeing Katniss looking so beautiful in all these wedding gowns, and the next, Peeta trails off. You realized there was never going to be a wedding? Asks Caesar gently. Peeta pauses for a long moment, as if deciding something. He looks out at the spellbound audience, then at the floor, then finally up at Caesar. Caesar, do you think all our friends here can keep a secret? An uncomfortable laugh emanates from the audience. What can he mean? Keep a secret from who? Our whole world is watching. I feel quite certain of it, says Caesar. We're already married, says Peeta quietly. The crowd reacts in astonishment, and I have to bury my face in the folds of my skirt so they can't see my confusion. Where on earth is he going with this? But how can that be? Asks Caesar. Oh, it's not an official marriage. We didn't go to the Justice Building or anything, but we have this marriage ritual in District 12. I don't know what it's like in the other districts, but there's this thing we do, says Peeta, and he briefly describes the toasting. Were your families there? Asks Caesar. No, we didn't tell anyone, not even Haymitch, and Katniss's mother never would have approved. But you see, we knew if we were married in the capital, there wouldn't be a toasting, and neither of us really wanted to wait any longer. So one day, we just did it, Peeta says. And to us, we're more married than any piece of paper or big party could make us. So this was before the quell, says Caesar. Of course before the quell. I'm sure we'd never have done it if we knew, says Peeta, starting to get upset. But who could have seen it coming? No one. We went through the games, we were victors. Everyone seemed so thrilled to see us together, and then out of nowhere, I mean, how could we anticipate a thing like that? You couldn't, Peeta. Caesar puts an arm around his shoulders. As you say, no one could have. But I have to confess, I'm glad you two had at least a few months of happiness together. Enormous applause. As if encouraged, I look up from my feathers and let the audience see my tragic smile of thanks. The residual smoke from the feathers has made my eyes teary, which adds a very nice touch. I'm not glad, says Peeta. I wish we had waited until the whole thing was done officially. This takes even Caesar aback. Surely even a brief time is better than no time. Maybe I'd think that too, Caesar, says Peeta bitterly, if it weren't for the baby. And I'm cutting myself off before I read Katniss's reaction just to complain about how in the movie Peeta stammers through it, which is not the correct way to deliver those lines. Peeta stammered for Because She Came Here With Me in the first book, another interview scene that was completely murdered in the movie, but we're not talking about the first movie today. And Peeta's mind and his words and his ability to manipulate the audience are his greatest weapon and his greatest skill. So it's frustrating for me to be presented in the movies with a guy who is just clearly not quite that. Though the audience does react to If It Weren't for the Baby, and we see Peeta flash this horrible smarmy look over at Haymitch as he cheers him when the audience finally reacts, but just as much as I love the baby bomb, as much as I love this scene and this character, it is wrong in the movie. And it's wrong in the movie in a way that I don't think actually serves any of the characters. Katniss, as always, is stripped away of her vulnerability, even though her, sort of girlishness and ability to play nice with the Capitol is a pretty characteristic thing for her. She has instead loaned Peeta's easy banter and charisma on the stage, because the movies do not like that boy. So she's bantery in a way that is suddenly untrue to her character or to how the interaction went in the book. And then she is turned into a bird in a way that, again, I have to imagine feels pretty inexplicable if you have not read the books. Catching Fire is a decent to pretty good movie, but I think it might genuinely be a bad adaptation, and I kind of can't believe I'm saying that. But at least by all the measures of understanding the characters or the situation that it's about, oh man, Let me continue with Katniss's reaction during the interview so that I can explain what that means, and I can put a bow on why I think this matters as a case study for the movies in general not really getting it. There. He's done it again. Dropped a bomb that wipes out the efforts of every tribute who came before him. Well, maybe not. Maybe this year he has only lit the fuse on a bomb that the victors themselves have been building, hoping someone would be able to detonate it. Perhaps thinking it would be me in my bridal gown, not knowing how much I rely on Cinna's talents, whereas Peeta needs nothing more than his wits. As the bomb explodes, it sends out accusations of injustice and barbarism and cruelty flying out in every direction. Even the most capital-loving, games-hungry, bloodthirsty person out there can't ignore it, at least for a moment, how horrific the whole thing is. I am pregnant. The audience can't absorb the news right away. It has to strike them and sink in and be confirmed by other voices before they begin to sound like a herd of wounded animals, moaning, shrieking, calling for help. And me? I know my face is projected in a tight close-up on the screen, but I don't make any effort to hide it. Because for a moment, even I am working through what Peeta has said. Isn't it the thing I dreaded most about the wedding? About the future? The loss of my children to the games? And it could be true now, couldn't it? If I hadn't spent my life building up layers of defenses until I recoil at even the suggestion of marriage or a family. Caesar can't rein in the crowd again, not even when the buzzer sounds. Peeta nods his goodbyes and comes back to his seat without any more conversation. I can see Caesar's lips moving, but the place is in total chaos and I can't hear a word. Only the blast of the anthem, cranked up so loud I can feel it vibrating through my bones, lets us know where we stand in the program. I automatically rise, and as I do, I sense Peeta reaching out for me. Tears run down his face as I take his hand. How real are the tears? Is this an acknowledgement that he has been stalked by the same fears that I have? That every victor has? Every parent in every district in Pan Am? I look back to the crowd, but the faces of Rue's mother and father swim before my eyes. Their sorrow, their loss. I turn spontaneously to Chaff and offer my hand. I feel my fingers close around the stump that now completes his arm and hold fast. And then it happens. Up and down the row, the victors begin to join hands. Some right away, like the Morphlings or Wyrus and Beatty. Others unsure but caught up in the demands of those around them, like Brutus and Anabaria. By the time the anthem plays its final strains, all 24 of us stand in one unbroken line in what must be the first public show of unity among the districts since the dark days. You can see the realization of this as the screens begin to pop into blackness. It's too late, though. In the confusion, they didn't cut us off in time. Everyone has seen. There's disorder on the stage now, too, as the lights go out and we're left to stumble back into the training center. I've lost hold of Chaff, but Peeta guides me into an elevator. Nick and Johanna try to join us, but a harried peacekeeper blocks their way and we shoot upward alone. The moment we step off the elevator, Peeta grips my shoulders. There isn't much time, so tell me, is there anything I have to apologize for? Nothing, I say. It was a big leap to take without my okay, but I'm just as glad I didn't know. Didn't have time to second guess him, to let any guilt over Gale detract from how I really feel about what Peeta did. Which is empowered. Somewhere very far off is a place called District 12, where my mother and sister and friends will have to deal with the fallout from this night. Just a brief hovercraft ride away is an arena where tomorrow Peeta and I and the other tributes will face our own form of punishment. But even if all of us meet terrible ends, something happened on that stage tonight that can't be undone. We victors staged our own uprising, and maybe, just maybe, the capital won't be able to contain this one. Okay, so at first, with that Peeta has done it again, wiped out the efforts of every tribute that came before him line, you might have been thinking that my irritation about how out of nowhere the crowd finally getting actually activated by the baby bluff in the movies wasn't fair. But I do think it's meaningful that Katniss continues and actually does see the bigger context of what this is. This reminds me, actually, of the quote that I read from Suzanne in the 2018 interview in my epilogue video, when I was saying it's one of the few times she's given further insight into her world. One of the things Suzanne said in that interview, in the back of an anniversary edition of the original series, is that when we enter Panem through Katniss's point of view, the country is already a powder keg of unrest, and Katniss is simply the spark. I think if I could distill my critiques of this movie franchise, and honestly, pretty much all the other badass teen girl YA ripoffs that would come after, down into one thing, it would be that they completely missed this. Katniss is, in fact, that special in the movies. Peeta got to have this one moment, but it's because of and about Katniss in the movie. And even through an Everlark reading, the importance of the other victors in this public show of solidarity with each other, in this rolling call for action that took place over the course of their interviews with Caesar, all gets cut just in favor of an only Katniss' special narrative. So rather than a series where Katniss is the spark that tips a long-simmering tension into an outright war, the Hunger Games movies series is a series about how Katniss Everdeen, Jennifer Lawrence, is a very special girl. And Katniss Everdeen is a very special girl. I literally have a Katniss flower tattooed on my arm. I love her so, so much. But the version of her that is giving that interview in the movie isn't the one in the books. It's not the version of Katniss I fell in love with. It's not the version we're supposed to understand the Capitol to have been so endeared by either. Katniss is special, but she's also completely out of her depth at pretty much all times. She's an unprepared teenage girl who gets thrust into the spotlight and into a leadership role that she didn't ask for and rarely, if ever, feels compelled to step into without outside forces directing her that way. I wish that in the movies we got to see that when the audiences are being manipulated, it's for the most part not Katniss manipulating them. She remembers to play to the camera a few times, sure, in the books, even before she meets back up with Peeta in the first arena. But as discussed in my video about the epilogue, the things that make Katniss so likable to us and to the crowd in the Capitol, and the things that make her so revolutionary to the rebels, are the moments where she is compassionate and empathetic. Which is also why her taking Chaff's hand is relevant, and I would love to talk more at some point about how that first show of unity between the districts since the Dark Days quote Katniss had hits so completely differently after Sunrise on the Reaping, but I decided to keep the spoilers in this video limited to just the original trilogy. My biggest fear, though, to speak without spoilers for a moment about the prequels, was that Katniss was going to be made less special or less important when Suzanne started returning to the world of Panem, especially to times before Katniss was born. Which is part of why it took me so long to even open myself up to the idea of reading Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, because I am very protective of Katniss Everdeen, and I did not want to be asked to think of her as less important. But I don't feel like that's what the prequels are asking of me. I feel like the prequels are doing an honestly amazing job at contextualizing this world Katniss became so important to, at showing how many people need to hope and work and dream and fight for a better future, and how even though it may feel like it takes forever for that to pay off, doesn't mean that it never will for anyone. Okay, now for the bow on it that I promised. By erasing the efforts, or at least the reactions by the audience to the efforts of the other tributes and their anger and their attempts at influencing the crowd, Katniss Everdeen is made simultaneously too important and also less human. Katniss Everdeen works so well as a protagonist for, again, reasons that are very easy to point to the failings of in other teen YA slop that came after her. She's made so important and so much less human, and then that is what a bunch of these other, divergent type women were modeled off of, and not after a real human character like Katniss Everdeen. And there's something so ironic about it, too, isn't there, for Katniss to be proud that this thing that happened, that feels so impossible, that is so impossible, between the hand-holding and the baby bluff and the explicit calls, that maybe the president simply doesn't know enough people want this to stop, because either he could make it end or he's not as all-powerful as people think he is. Editing, and I realized I completely forgot to finish my sentence in my script even. The irony to me is that Katniss is proud that this is something that cannot be taken away, and then in the adaptation, it is so undercut and neutered in the ways that I continue to describe in the rest of this section. I might not have needed to cut this in, but also you weren't going to see JoJo until the end if I didn't, so. The broadcast recap of the interviews is cancelled, and Haymitch describes mobs in the streets. Haymitch also says something else that I think is really useful to understanding the way that this universe works, though I do think that universe is really a bit too theoretical of a word here. Haymitch says something that I think is useful for understanding the way that people in Panem are oppressed. Here is the very end of what I was reading earlier, after the interviews are over. We wait for the others to return, but when the elevator opens, only Haymitch appears. It's madness out there. Everyone's been sent home, and they've canceled the recap of the interviews on television. Peeta and I hurry to the window and try to make sense of the commotion far below us on the streets. What are they saying? Peeta asks. Are they asking the president to stop the games? I don't think they know themselves what to ask. The whole situation is unprecedented. Even the idea of opposing the Capitol's agenda is a source of confusion for the people here, says Haymitch. But there's no way Snow would cancel the games. You know that, right? I do, of course. He could never back down now. The only option left to him is to strike back, and strike back hard. Also, while I'm already on the point of being annoyed by the erasure of the importance of District 11, and also, I'm sorry, this will make way more sense if you also watched my video about the epilogue, Rue is also part of this dynamic where Katniss and Peeta are being spurred on and set up by Chaff and Cedar. Explicitly so, because when Katniss meets Cedar, Cedar hugs her, and Katniss said she knows that it must somehow be because of Rue and Thresh. The interview scene in the movie would be a really good time to have hammered in that importance, if not to get a better idea of the districts, then at least to understand the tributes coming from them a bit better. And I know I said the baby bluff is the worst part of this scene, if only because I watched an 8-minute upload of this scene that I'll link in the description below. You can see for yourself if I'm being too mean. I don't want Lionsgate coming after me. I know I said it's the worst part of the scene because I just kept watching it and being like, oh my god, I can't believe this still gets worse and worse. But the other thing beyond the way that they wrote those lines for Josh is that, as mentioned, all of this is very entertaining to watch, which I do think is a bad part of this. The Hunger Games series as a whole, I don't think is particularly fun to watch. I don't think I know anybody who watches Mockingjay Part 1 and 2 on loop, right? I was extremely into the Hunger Games even while the movies were still coming out, and I haven't seen the last two at all since they were in theaters. But I have found myself wanting to watch Catching Fire pretty frequently, and I know I've seen it way more recently than I did see the last movies in the series. But yeah, Catching Fire, that one's fun to watch. It's fun to watch because it's based on what was, until I read Sunrise on the Reaping, easily my favorite Hunger Games book. It's fun to watch because there's so much material and all of that material is amazing, and because everyone there is doing a pretty serviceable job, even though the screenwriters didn't really know how to write their new additions or their returning characters. But Catching Fire, the movie, is fun in a way that I think strips it of its lessons, its meanings, its message. The interviews get downplayed, and the only real chance for change comes from Katniss being special enough to break the arena with her electric arrow and get claw-gamed out by President Coin and District 13. And yeah, sure, that is also how it happens in the books, but I do think that it matters that there was that big show of unity, and I think that the big show of unity went well beyond them just holding hands for a few seconds at the end. I think it was all of it. And I also forgot to mention earlier what a disservice I think it is to strip Peeta's tears in the interview scene. I hate his smarmy little look at Haymitch because he wouldn't have done something that made his stunt that obviously look like bullshit, but also because he would have been crying, or at least just watching the audience and seeing what he had just done. You could have sold me on him staring at Katniss, maybe, but I was always going to miss him crying since that's just not in the movie. As we already discussed in the read about him and Johanna from the first book, Peeta actually cries for the cameras quite a few times. I think we see a little bit of his tears in the first movie, but we focus on Peeta as little as possible in the first movie, so it's not exactly important, and it doesn't feel very in keeping with the rest of him either as he continues to be portrayed in the movies. I think Peeta crying is great though, not only because it's part of what's required to endear me to a boy character at all, but because it, like much of Peeta's characterization, does feel very dissimilar to me from other male leads of the era or the genre. I also think Katniss's realization here when Peeta does cry that Peeta would have been exactly as consumed by the existential horror of being backed into a marriage where there would be an expectation of procreation, of children to be sacrificed to punish them. I think Katniss finally realizing that is so good. It's one of so many examples of them ending up on the same page even before they realize as much. And do you know who else she gets on the same page with just a slight minor delay? Johanna Mason, of course, with Make Him Pay For It. But even though Katniss realizes what Johanna means once the interviews are underway, she doesn't fully know how to do that. She models Cinna's dress, Cinna's big rebellious statement, but Katniss needs her district partner and his mind for strategy, and she feels empowered by it. The last thing that Haymitch says to Katniss after they've said their goodbyes for the night before the arena is for her to remember who the real enemy is. And I don't feel like the movie really gives us nearly enough setup for this. I feel like the interview scene is so important and so perfect in the book in ways that would not have been impossible to adapt. I don't think it comes across nearly so much in the movie how easily the districts could all align themselves against the capital, and then it makes the fact that there's an agreement in place for the tributes to protect Katniss and Peeta even more jarring, which I know that's the point. You can't get everything across in a movie, and if we're coming along with Katniss, shouldn't things be confusing and hard to get a grasp on? But again, I feel like if I had not read the books, I would have been very lost on a lot of things, including and especially how lost and confused Katniss is, how much she is going along with things as they happen, how much she was not actually originally set up to be the Mockingjay. And how well did you adapt a book, really, if your main character is that unrecognizable? And not even just the main character, as evidenced here. I can zoom in on pretty much any given character in a scene that should really easily showcase a bunch of them and find critical failings in their portrayal in a way that doesn't even do anything to move the story forward. Catching Fire might be bad, I fear. I'm genuinely a little bit scared to rewatch the whole thing. I am officially going to read the prequel. I have it now. Thank you to my bestie for sending it to me. I'm really enjoying letting myself escape into the series again ever since I read Sunrise on the Reaping. And I'm really grateful for how many of you let me know that you're down for more videos like this from me in the future, because I have so much to say, and I'm sure that once I have encountered the book version of Lucy Gray for myself, I will have even more to talk about. Other Hunger Games videos on deck beside the Peeta Mellark defense video include a video about that pop radio remix of The Hanging Tree. Like I said, I know I need to meet Lucy Gray first. Some discussions of the marketing around the movies and other places where I think the adaptation really failed, and maybe just a full-on recap review of the prequels before I circle back to the original trilogy. I don't know. Let me know if that sounds interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for your amazing feedback on my video about the epilogue. I love you very much. I love hearing your thoughts. I love how much everybody had to say. I genuinely was not sure whether or not that video was going to do well at all, and I'm very, very happy that it did and that so many people enjoyed it. So thank you so much for letting me know. Thank you also to Aura for sponsoring today's video, and thank you to my lovely Patreon friends, a few of whose names you can see on the screen right now. Patreon is a great way to help support me financially, and you get a couple of extra videos from me a month. Also, if you're already a video enjoyer and up tier sub and your name is not on the screen, it is only because I'm very scared of listing anybody who doesn't want to be listed. So please just go comment on one of the posts over there to make sure that you're listed, because I'd love to have you here. Thank you so much, Patreon. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, even if you don't want your name. Thank you very much to the Patreon supporters. Thank you also to everybody who has supported me by buying me a coffee or super chatting me during live streams. That's also something that makes such a difference and is such a huge help. Thank you for all the super thanks on my video about my EEOC complaint. And thank you for letting me have a job where I get to talk about the Hunger Games for cumulatively hours every month. That's really cool. Thank you. I love you. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.